I'd like to thank Data Toboggan for inviting me back to this year to talk. The hot topic is Microsoft Fabric. I'm just going to do a couple blurbs about myself and we'll dive right into the topic because we only got 45 minutes and there's a lot to cover. The topic's basically going to be covering Lakehouse and data warehouse in Fabric, okay? I'm an avid writer and life learner, so if you're interested, there's a lot of good old topics as well as new topics on MS SQL tips. This year, I worked with Steve Jones to write for SQL Server Central, and I'm doing topics on Microsoft Fabric. So if you want to learn, like, for instance, how to write to OneLake using PowerShell, yeah, it's old, but, maybe you have a system on premise that's running PowerShell and you can get the data up there. Please take a look at this article. There's a bunch of other articles out there that are very interesting. Last but not least, what I'm talking about today, this is the GitHub URL for the topic today. So I'll paste that into the chat. Let's see if I can find the chat. Okay, here we go. Okay, great, excellent. So one of the things I was really confused about when I first started with Fabric is that everything has to be in Microsoft Azure AD. Now it's called Entra, right? Microsoft likes changing names all the time. So just got to pay attention, but it's the same, deal. They just keep on enhancing things or making little tweaks. So to even start out a trial subscription, you have to have a URL that's not like at outlook.com because that's not going to work. It has to be a real URL for the email. So basically, I used my Crafty DBA website, which I have a bunch of emails, mailboxes, and that's how I logged in. So again, we're going to be talking about data engineering with Fabric. I'm going to do a bunch of switch between real-time demos. Hopefully, they don't break. That's the problem with real-time demos, as well as talk about bookwork, right? Because we have to understand what is Fabric. Okay, so what happened? In November of 2023, Fabric went GA. Now, I didn't look at it to then because I knew a lot of changes were happening. That's what typically happens with Microsoft. The project name was Trident. I've been hearing about it for 2 years, but didn't get really involved. So there's 4 types of problems we can solve with Fabric, right? A lakehouse. What is a lakehouse? It's Microsoft's version of like a virtual Spock session, right? We can have files, we can have tables, right? And on top of that, what do you get? You either get a semantic model, which can be used by Power BI, or we get a SQL endpoint, which people can query. Now, for the lakehouse, it's a read-only endpoint, and we'll get into that. For the data warehouse, similar thing, but guess what? We get a read-write endpoint, right? So now we can put data into the warehouse. I really like the data warehouse because it's been rewritten. Prior versions of the warehouse were the MPP appliance. If you remember back to PDW, which was bought by Microsoft back at least 10 plus years ago, maybe 15. The interesting thing with that was you always had to worry about sharding the files into 60 little segments. That's gone away. Everything's based upon Delta, which is nice. There's also data science and real-time analytics. I'll just go over the quick high-level diagrams, but we're not talking about them today, okay? So basically, how do we store data in Fabric? How do we get insights into that data? Okay, so we're going to go over the architectural diagrams. What is OneLake? What is a warehouse? And what is a lakehouse? These diagrams I actually get from a friend at Microsoft. I used to work for Microsoft and he's still there in sales. And I said, hey, can you give me some diagrams because they do a good job, better than I can do. And, again, I work as a daytime as a consultant. So, this is the free time that I have. I design, teaching as well as learning. So what is Fabric? We can see right here that unified foundation, the OneLake right here, that is basically blob storage, right? You're going to see it. I can show you the point to it. It's ADLS Gen 2. but it's specific to the service, okay? And we have a lot of pieces that we've worked with in the past, right? We have data integration, right? So we have pipelines, and there's two types of pipelines. We can have what Microsoft used to call wrangling data flows, which is the M Power Query language, right? And we also have pipelines, which I like. They got rid of mapping data flows. So if you have stuff in the past for mapping data flows, it's not going to work. Data engineering synapse, this is your notebooks, okay? We'll get into that. We also have the data warehouse, which is just basically like a SQL Server database. The only difference is that there's limitations. For instance, in a warehouse, you usually don't have constraints, right? In the past, you couldn't alter a table. They've recently added it. I'm really happy. I haven't written about it yet. But in the past, when you wanted to create a change to a table and add a field, you would create the new table and you do a CTAS as, right? You create a new table as, and you renamed old and then get the data in. They're also doing data science and real-time analytics, right? So real-time analytics is interesting. They're using Acousto. We'll get more into that. And everything's based upon Power BI, right? You want to do some reporting once the data's in there. Data Activator has changed too. It's still there in the product. I don't know if it's named the same. But the interesting thing with Data Activator is that this whole real-time thing, they were going to call it One Lake versus One River, and I think they changed the name. But again, it's like, hey, I drop a file into the lake. Let's do something, right? It's a semaphore for me to do some work, okay? So now I've showed you the boxes, and what we're going to really focus on are really the first three. I'm going to talk about data integration, which is Data Factory. I'm going to talk about Fabric, and I'm going to talk about the warehouse. So we can see these are the scenarios, and basically everything goes into the one lake. Let's take a look at the warehouse, okay? I'm going to show you two ways to actually get data into the warehouse. One way is we can write a pipeline, right? I'm going to go with traditional pipelines because they can be parameterized really easily versus mapping or wrangling data flows, which I've always had issues with. So wrangling data flows are great if you have end users that want self-service, then they can do it themselves. Another way to get data into the lakehouse is to use a concept called shortcuts, and it's like data mesh, right? And what it says is, hey, I got some data at this location. Give me the credentials to get to the data. Now, there's two places you can put the shortcuts, and I'll show you this in a lake. One is at the table level. If it's automatically a Delta file format, it's going to recognize it and put it into the catalog, the Hive catalog, and you can see the data. Another way is you can just do a shortcut to a file, and you say, hey, this is a CSV file, and then you can process it. Regardless of the way, we're going to get the data into the lakehouse and transform it through the medallion zones, okay? And we can use Power BI to report on it. The data warehouse has something similar. We're not going to go over pipelines. We're going to go over two things. I'm going to recreate the pubs database. We'll go through that exercise and show you some interesting facts about, what challenges I had and what's still supported. And also there's mounts, right? You can mount, it's kind of like a shortcut. And then we're going to use the copy into syntax. The copy into syntax is great because it allows you to copy a lot of records right into the warehouse. Again, usually when you do warehouses, say if you use an Azure Fabric, right? So Microsoft Fabric data warehouse, or using Snowflake, usually put the data into a staging table, and then you write a store procedure to transform it, say upsert it into the following table, right? Again, remember, it is a data warehouse, so we don't want to do singleton inserts, deletes, or updates. We want to do massive amounts of changes. And again, under the hood, it's the Delta format, right? So that means it's a bunch of Parquet files and log files, right? So if we did 100,000 singleton inserts, right, we'd have 100,000 files, right? If we did 10,000 batches, right, of 10,000, 10 of them, right, it's 100,000 records. Now we only have 10 files, right? So that's why doing stuff in batch makes sense with the data warehouse. I'm going to leave this here. I'm not an expert at data science. I do have a data science certificate. Unfortunately, I didn't do it as a J job, and maybe one of these days when I retire and I want to do something fun, I'll do data science. I just haven't had enough time. Again, usually you get a model, you get a training set and a testing set, and you do scoring, right? And real-time analytics, like I said, this is changing. I played around with it. It seems pretty cool. One of the things you're going to show you is the lack of support for things. Like, for instance, if you create a shortcut, we can create it, but it doesn't show me a list of shortcuts. So there's some features that Microsoft are behind on the backlog for adding to the product. I'm sure they'll eventually get there. Right now, it just makes it a little more difficult to work with. As long as you know those areas that there's going to be some work in the future, you can work around and have a solution. Okay, so let's talk about the lakehouse. I'm going to pause. Anyone have any questions? Okay, if I don't hear anything, I'll just move on. So we're going to talk about Apache Spark clusters, the medallion architecture, data ingestion, data engineering, and we're going to talk about 2 real-time examples. Okay, what is Spark? This is a slide that I've used many times. Initially, when I got into Spark was with Azure Databricks, and Microsoft back then didn't have a product. It was Databricks, and then they came out with eventually Synapse. So this was about 6 years ago, right? What can you do in Spark right out of the bat? You can do data frames, right? And we'll talk about how to read and write data. You can also do graph. We're not going to talk about that. Streaming and machine learning. Okay, what is a Spark cluster? Well, behind the scenes, Microsoft's not telling you, but you get an actual driver which actually runs the code, and then it gives it out to each of the executors, okay? One of the things I really like about Fabric is something called a starter cluster. It means they have warm clusters sitting there. And the problem that you have with processing in Spark is it takes time to spin up the cluster, okay? The cluster's right there, it's ready to go. Things happen really quickly. Okay, so let's talk about the medallion architecture. This is a diagram specifically for Microsoft. We can see we get some data in. We're going to use a pipeline to copy it in. We're going to do EventWorks. And then we want to transform it from bronze to silver. We might have a raw layer saying, hey, it's raw. Okay. We always have to worry about, is it a full load, incremental? We're going to do full loads. They're easy. Incrementals, you have to worry about watermarks to bring the incremental over, and you also have to worry about a key to do the merge. Okay. So data ingestion. One of the things, Data Factory is really good because it has a ton of connectors to copy from point A to point B. And this got you right at the bottom. Gateway is no longer available product. That's one I was looking at March. Roll forward to past build, and guess what? It's out there. So you can use both data flows. Before it was only, the gateway was only acceptable for data flows. We used to have something called the self-hosted integration runtime, Shire for Azure Data Factory. That's been replaced with the gateway. Thank you for Raza Radicad. He did this diagram. This is my diagram. Basically, shortcuts is data meshing, right? A shortcut allows us to say, hey, here's some storage. Go ahead and put the information for it, and it just posted it up. Now, how does a shortcut work behind the scenes? It goes, and the very first time you say, hey, show me some files, it caches those files. And as long as you go ahead and query those files every day, it pulls in a new copy of it. So if it doesn't go out of the cache. So say if I have a Delta file and day one, I say, hey, show me internet sales from EventWorks. It'll get me that data. Day two, say I made some changes on the source system and I query it again. Because it's Delta, we know it's just adding new Parquet files and log files, unless we do a vacuum. So therefore, it's only going to get the newer files. So it's going to be really quick, and that's really cool. And again, like I said, Delta is the preferred format. One of the things, there's a couple gotchas, and I'll show you in the video. One is demos that you can't do views. And the second thing is managed tables are supported, unmanaged tables are not. Okay, let's get into the demo. And this is the fun part, right? The rest of it is like, hey, I'm talking about some technology, but how do we apply it, right? So Fabric Data Factory supports wrangling data flows, right? Mapping data flows are not supported based upon Power Query. Parameterization is not easy, so we're going to use the pipeline. Spark notebooks are supported. New clusters are quick and reusable. I told you why. So starter classes parameterization is easy, scaling is controlled, okay? And examples, we're going to use the VentureWorks database, right? This is the image here. It's metadata-driven design, so we're going to have a metadata file. We're going to use both pipelines and notebooks. Data's copied into one lake. We're also going to do the S&P 500, and we're going to show you data meshing. So we're going to create a shortcut. Tables or files appear, and we're going to use notebooks to transform, okay? So before I started this presentation, I went ahead and I cleared out my environment, okay? Because, I can show you an environment that's full, but doesn't make any sense, right? So let's take a look at, let's start at the beginning. I'm going to close out of here. I'm going to close out of here. When you get into Fabric, right, you have to sign in, and then you'll see something like My Workspace, right? And if you click on My Workspace, or you can do workspaces. You can see that I'm writing for SQL Server Central. That's where it is. My friend Sherry's using my workspace because we're working on something to work. There's a demo I was doing for an article, and then there's my workspace. So this is where I created everything. And there's 3 objects we're going to talk about. The VentureWorks, which I just told you, S&P 500. And we're also going to talk about the data warehouse for pubs, okay? So let's go into VentureWorks, okay, and we click on it. And it's going to bring up the lakehouse, okay? Now, what do you have in the lakehouse? You have tables and you have raw, right? And files. So this is where you put the files in. How is there different ways to do it? If you're an end user and you just want to use Spark, you can say, hey, guess what? Upload a file or create a folder. It's real easy to do it, right? But that's not, something that's industrial strength, right? This is not, what we designed for our clients, right? We want something that's automated. So we can see right here that we have dim currency, right? And we have different days in which I copied over the file. And we can see this is a actual CSV file. We can download it, I think, right? So we can, I want to load, click on it. Maybe, there we go. So we can see it's pipe delimited, no header. So that's a problem, right? For ingestion because, hey, there's no way to understand this, right? So let's go back to my workspace and let's take a look at some notebooks I had. So the very first thing we need to do is, because this is a, I'll just show you an example and then we'll create the metadata and then run the pipeline in the background. Because again, we don't have much time. I'm 20 minutes ready in. So remember, when you write pipelines, there is something called parameters right here. And that's an option, right? We can set that. There's a place to do it. I always forget where. But this is my parameters. I'm saying, hey, I want sales LT. I want delimited. It's pipe delimited. Header equals false, right? And it says remove the file, right? And then create the file. So I'm going to drop both the bronze and silver, right? I'm going to load it into a data frame. Since I'm not passing a schema, it's not going to get a schema. And then it's going to create the first one. Then it's going to say, hey, let's add some things like the timestamp. And one important thing you always want to do is mark where the data comes from. Because remember, you're taking all these data files and pushing it into a Delta file. Where did that row come from? I don't know. There's a thing called input file name, which is awesome. It allows us to know where it is. And then last but not least, we create a table. And then we get some counts. Okay, so let's run this separately. Like I said, right here, we can see this is Python. The default is a starter cluster. We can see it's 1 to 10 nodes. We hit run all, and it's going to go pretty quick. Now, there's a concept that you don't have in Databricks or other Spark deployments, which is basically the notebook's pinned to the lakehouse. So we can see it's pinned to one lakehouse right here. So we can see that it read the parameters. Now it's processing this 9 seconds. It's going to remove the existing tables. Okay. And it's loading the data frame. So it read it, says temporary view. So I created a view off the data frame after I let it. It's recursively doing it. So there's multiple files, multiple audit trail. Okay, so this might take a little while. Then what it's doing is actually creating the table. And this is the bronze table. And it's adding the timestamps. Because we read multiple files, again, it's dim currency, raw, right? And then dim currency. We can see it's reading data from February, March and April, I did a lot of talking and running of this program. So it's thinking. So it's done. Now I am creating a Silver Zone. And the Silver Zone, basically, it's tables. So when we started, there wasn't a table. And why is it telling me it's not there? Couldn't load details. Well, of course, this is always the fun of doing something from hand. And this one's going slow because right now I've gone over to the trial, and in trial I no longer have like high compute, so it's taken a while. So I might just set up the thing to be automatic and then run it. It's still thinking. Okay. So we can see that it succeeded. It ran 8 jobs, and this one has 0 of 9, so it's still running. So that's what we're waiting for. Okay. Yep. Okay. I'm going to wait another minute, and then we'll move on to the next demo. Okay, finally finished. Whew. So you can see there's a lot of rows, right? Even though it's currency, we have, what, 18 million rows it's reading up for some reason. And let's make sure I had the path right. So we had files raw sales LT, right? That might be the problem because drop table, right? And again, files var path. Where's the var path? The var path is sales LT. So maybe it read all of them up, which is running it this way is probably not a good idea. So let me do this. I am going to cancel this. And I am going to set up the metadata and just let it run, and that should work fine. So let's delete this. And again, this might be because I did not have the setup correctly, and I deleted everything. So let's go back and let's talk about metadata, right? Because we saw that the problem we have is it's a pipe to limited file, but there's no metadata, right? So we're going to create a table called metadata. Okay, it's in this lake house, and it shouldn't be, this is where we were a minute ago. Okay, and this one should go away too, so I'm just going to delete this. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a table. And the nice thing about Delta is, even though it's a file, we can still run SQL against it. So % means run SQL. We're going to insert into here, and we're actually going to give it a schema. See, this is the schema. So let's run this all. And this is going to create a metadata table for us. Yeah, I think I should have ran it. Again, it's been a while since I've done this demo. I should have ran it from the pipeline, not from here. I'll run it from the pipeline, and then we'll skip on to the next demo. So if we hit refresh, one thing you'll notice with playing with Fabric is things don't refresh quickly. So now there it is. Again, behind the scenes, it's Power BI. The system has to create all the metadata, log it, so it's all REST web API calls. So eventually gets done, right? So it just ran, this one's running dim date. Now guess what? We're running geography. This is inserting a row for geography. This is inserting a row for Spark, so it's done. And if we go all the way down, we can caught up. We're still running for product category. And again, this is all the stuff that, AdventureWorks, the 11 tables, if I remember right. Dim sales reason, dim sales territory, fact internet sales, this comment's wrong. Fact, internet sales reason. And then guess what? Now we have our metadata. So we can see that we're telling it the location where the data is. Okay, and that's what we need for that notebook that loads it up full. The file name that we want to create, and it's going to move it through two states. It's going to grab the most recent one for silver and all of them for bronze. And the table name is going to create in a schema. Okay, so we're all set to run. Let me show you the pipeline, and then we'll go on to the next one, because again, 45 minutes is not enough time to go over everything. So when you create new, you can do anything. You can create a new lakehouse, and then you start your notebooks inside the lakehouse. Or you can do a new, and you can do a data warehouse, right? And then you start your SQL. You can do a new in a pipeline, right? I have an existing pipeline. So that is all the way down here. There's two of them. There's load. Let's take a look at full load and see how it works, and then I'll show you what the one is. So first it's going to do a lookup. And this is a bug or enhancement that I keep on asking Microsoft for. They haven't put it in yet. We can see that we're pulling the metadata table, but it has to pull the whole metadata table. I don't want the whole metadata table, right? I know from the parameter I want to run job number 11, which is the 11th row, which is sales internet reason, right, off the top of my head. We're also setting, remember the folder, and this is the reason why I got in trouble, because we're copying the data over. We need to create it with a new folder, year, month, day, date, sortable. And then what we do is you're going to see this goes through and it says, hey, it's going to call 11 times, which I don't really want to do. I'd love to filter on that lookup. And then once it finds the one that's right, it's going to call the notebook for that with the right parameters, which I had last time wrong. Okay, so we're going to close out of this one and we're going to run the main one. The main one is VentureWorks, okay? And there's always been an interesting thing in VentureWorks or Azure Data Factory on how things are done for incrementing. There's no way you can say variable equals variable plus one, right? Which is crazy, but it's what we have, right? It's basically under the hood, it's a Azure function. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the variable, and then what we have to do is we have to say current equals current plus one, right? But then we update the counter, right? And we can't really say the counter, and the counter equals the current, right? So basically I'm going to kick this off, and what this is going to do is we can see that settings, it's going to expression, where is it? It's a general. Yep, it might be in the while loop that I did in. It's right here, and then we know there's a fixed number of loops to go through because it's 11. So let me kick this off, and you're going to see it's going to call the until, and it says, okay, call full load. And this is just like Data Factory, which you've used before, right? So we can see the input now, okay, is pipeline ID 1, okay? And the output, still waiting. So now if we click into the progress, and I always forget which one to do, might be this one. Come on. Okay, it's this one. We can see this is the pipeline run ID, right? Now we can go into the child pipeline. And the child pipeline is the one I just showed you. See, it actually called all 11, and then it found the one that it actually liked, okay? And if we look, the one that liked, it should be the very first one. So I'm hoping that's so. So we can see now it's pulling up the dim currency, which is related to 1, and it's passing the schema. So it's going to do all the work. So let's let this run in the background. Let's move on to the second demo. And again, I apologize for going really fast. I do have this pre-recorded out there before. Ooh, did I just kill it? One of the things I'm always worried about is it still running? Come on. Yeah, it's still running. Cool. Always worried about closing windows, and you're like, oh, is it done yet? No. So we're going to go back to workspace. We're going to talk about short points. Remember we talked about data meshing and short points, shortcuts are the way to do it. We have another lakehouse called S&P 500. And if you're curious, again, I want to show you one thing. The semantic model right here is where you tie into Power BI. This is where the SQL endpoint is. So if your end users love, okay, SSMS, so on, you can show, and again, this hasn't been refreshed because it's still running, but we could go ahead and we could take a look at the gold data point, and we could actually create a view. and this view could be exposed. Okay, and it's just a summarization of the data. So let's go back to this when the load is complete to take a look at the details. I am going to close back out of here, and we're going to go to S&P 500. That's the other one. We can see right now this is great because this is refresh VentureWorks, and we can see add one, and it's running the second one. So it loaded one table so far. Okay, both the bronze and silver from the raw. So workspaces. So my workspace, and then we're going to show you the S&P 500. So S&P 500's here, but I'm going to bring up the notebook, which is called Data Mesh via Shortcuts, and show you what it does. And why does it give me an error? It shouldn't have. Okay. So we have something similar here. And this one is going to pull in S&P 500, and it's going to run the delimited full no history. So the notebook again. Okay. The only difference is not going to do any history. And it will create both of them for the S&P 500 2013, right? So if we look at it, we got a silver and gold. Let's delete this and then rerun it, okay? And I'll tell you how it's working, and we'll move on to the next example. So there's a couple ways to do this. Delete. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do the shortcut. So let's minimize this, and hopefully it works because the interface was causing me issues. See right here, it says refresh. The interface is kind of funky because, okay, see now I can create a new subfolder but no link, right? So I'm going to close out of here, the data mesh. Instead of going this way, I'm going to go right into my workspace into the lake house, okay? Now we're here, we can say new shortcut. So I could say new shortcut, and I could say, hey, I want to go to, in this case, I had existing data in Azure Data Lake. And, you know, we can say it's Laura, and we can say learn more. Whoops, why did it go there? That's not what I wanted. And you can see right here, it's going to Contoso, but I could create a new shortcut. I already have one there. You can tell these are shortcuts because see the actual link right here says bronze, okay? So if we go back to what I was showing you, which was that one notebook, which is under workspaces, my workspace, and it was under data mesh via shortcuts, okay? We can see this is going to call Spark utils, which is like DB utils. You can do FS, which is file system, LS, or you can do notebook run. It's going to run the notebook with the same parameters we did. And what's going to do is I deleted the two tables. Remember, I don't know if you were paying attention, but there was a bronze and a silver. Let's just run this one. And if this works correctly, we'll get two more tables come up. Unlike, you know, we saw it in the pipeline, which we can drill into the child pipeline. You just have to sit back and be patient. It's going to load in the space. The actual pipeline notebook called delimited full no history, and it's going to pass the parameters to it, and it's going to run. So now it says the job started. There's 16 steps. It ran 16. It's showing each of the steps. And like I said, this is pretty quick. If I was running this in Databricks, I'd probably have to wait 3 to 5 minutes for it. So it's going to run a lot of stuff because there's a lot of steps in that notebook, okay? The main thing is we want to know is, will these tables show up, right? And guess what? The full table showed up in bronze. And guess what? The full table showed up in silver. So it's finished, okay? So again, we can do engineering doing that. We can also, if we did a shortcut and the data was specifically, and again, see, once you have the notebook up, it doesn't allow you to do the shortcut. So you have to go in the lake house without the notebook. But if you do a shortcut to a storage location that has a Delta table, it just shows up as a table. And therefore, you don't even have to process it. You don't have to read it in and then write it to the catalog. Okay, so I think I've talked enough about Spark. Let's talk about the data warehouse, because that's an interesting product too. Okay. And I love SQL. I've been doing SQL for seems like a gazillion years. My first version was 6.5. I know I stopped sharing, so let me see if I can get to it. Maybe I didn't. Hang on. Okay, let's go to share. I apologize for coughing also. I'm still fighting the end of COVID, so if you do traveling in the near future and you don't have the latest shot, I suggest you wear a mask because I just got back from holiday and I'm still enjoying the effects of the newest COVID. It's not as bad as the very first one, but still not something that you want to come home with. Excuse me. Okay, so this is where we left off. I'm going to switch out a presenter view in a minute, and we're all set. Awesome. So one lake, uniform architecture, in a warehouse syntax, and 2 examples, and we'll wrap up, okay? So we talked about, when you're in Synapse, right, in warehouse, you're going to use T-SQL. But underneath that table is really a Delta table, right? It's a Delta Parquet format. Spark, same thing. Acoustical language, same thing. Analysis services for Power BI, it's still Delta Parquet. They've redesigned everything to use Parquet. It's awesome. Okay, warehouse syntax. Core objects, tables, views, functions, stored procedures. Most of them work. Guess what? There's limitations because it's a warehouse. It's not a SQL database, okay? It's not a relational database. So for instance, default and check constraints are not supported. Primary and foreign keys are not supported. There's no order increment. There's no alter table. This has been changed. So this was added after build just recently. Limited support for system views and stored procedures. So basically, refer to documentation when developing. It's going to be constantly changing. It's a new product. Use Data Factory to ingest into staging tables, or you can use the copy syntax, okay? I'm going to show you how to build it from just T-SQL statements from the ground up. We'll also get into copy into because I like it. We're going to talk about 2 things. The publisher's database, pubs, right here. First time I looked at it, when I was using 6.5, 7.0 came out, and boom, pubs was out there. It's a small database, toy we call them. And there's also S&P 500, which I showed you data, okay? So, and in summary, that's where we are. So, doing pretty good on time. Going to go back to the next demo, okay? This is all running, so we're going to close out of this one. I'll come back at the very end to look to see if the VentureWorks is done and answer any questions. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to my workspace. I'm going to look at pubs, right? So again, every time you deploy something here, there's a semantic model that you can do Power BI reports on. Remember, the only difference between the SQL endpoint here and this SQL endpoint, this is read, right? This is read, okay? So we're going to click on it. Okay, so we can see it's already built, okay? I'm going to do something that you should not do, which is just tear everything down. So this one basically just drops everything. So if we run and sit back, kind of reminds me of like if you ever did anything with Synapse for the data warehouse, gone. Same messages, similar. We can see the tables are gone. No views. Everything's been dropped. Let's talk about the make data warehouse, okay? So we can see this is basically start the script, and it does support raise error, which is just basically like a message, okay? And if the authors table exists, drop it. If not, create it. See this? This is interesting. We can tell the optimizer what we consider as a primary key. But there's 2 things. We have to tell it's non-clustered, and the second thing, we have to tell it it's not enforced, okay? So we're going to create all these tables, okay? And it's nothing, you haven't seen if you've done SQL, for years. And then we're going to also, you can see we're doing batches. We're going to delete from authors, and we're going to insert a bunch of data, okay? There's some interesting things that if you haven't looked at the SQL language that's supported, like for instance, it does support Unicode. We don't have to worry about that anymore. What else does it does? It does support hex, right? So we can see the hex values going in. It also supports money types, so we can see $ and money types, okay? Versus a string, which is an integer versus a integer, okay? So basically that's it. So there's nothing to write home about. I'm going to go all the way down here. Interesting thing, views. Is views supported? Yes, they are. So we can drop the existing view. We can create a new view, right? And in a new view, we can say, hey, join these tables. Now, I didn't change the syntax. If I was redesigning this from scratch, it's using ANSI 9089 syntax, right? I would say authors join on titles on this value, join title author. It's not there. Also, store procedures are supported. So this is a very simple store procedure. Give a percentage. Guess what? Select from the royalties for the author, give them a percentage, right? We can also do roll-ups. See, this is doing a roll-up, group by roll-ups, and so on. So this is all done. I'm just going to run it. Let's run it and see what happens. And so now if we go to tables and hit refresh, we can see the tables are there. We can see the one view. Hopefully it'll eventually get there. It's probably still in supporting inserting data. One thing's interesting is when you say new query, it automatically saves it for you under my queries here. So that's something to pay attention. And maybe you'll get some queries here that you don't like or you do want, and see this one's here, but I didn't rename it. Okay. Okay, cool. While this is running, I'm going to talk to you about a bug. You can see this one says, hey, copy into S&P 500, and it's saying test, and this works fine. But if we have something that has, like here, this one's the copy into syntax, which I'm really excited about. You can go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to create a table called S&P 500. Okay, perfectly, and it's going to be on the schema stocks, right? I don't know if you saw, but this is schema DBO. So we can create that. And then if we run this, it's not going to work. And the reason why it's not going to work is because right here, there's a bug for using a self-host shared access signature, SAS. There's a bug with ampersand. It doesn't like it. Now, if we rename it to year 2013, it will work, okay? So let's go back to this one, see if it's done. It's done. Awesome. So that means now we can actually do a query. I'll show you a query in a minute if I can find one. Maybe number 4. Nope. Oh, that's the S&P. We'll skip that one, but just to show you there's data there, I can go here and then say, there you go. That's the data preview. And it does up to, I think, 1,000 rows or 10,000. You can look at the documentation. I'm going to go back to the copy into and then wrap up. So the copy into is the most important thing that I think they've added. They added it in Synapse, and it competes with, Snowflake. So basically, we want to delete from S stocks. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out which one I need to run. I got a couple versions. Let's just try running this one. Maybe it still has a schema there. Okay, so then gonna run this one. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the one that doesn't work, okay? So I'm going to run this all the way down here. And then what's going to do is it's going to say there's no data to insert, basically. And it says succeeded, but then if we go back here and we run refresh on schemist, right? Hopefully S&P 500 showed up, stocks, right? And then tables, S&P 500, excuse me. And we click this, there's no data. But I know there's data there. What's going on? Like I said, there's a bug, right? So now we're going to go back to the query, which is this one. And what we're going to do is on this last one, we're going to go copy into with using the fully path. And again, this is all cool stuff. Just remember, Microsoft's still working on it. Hopefully by next November, it'll be a year that it's been out. All these bugs will be fixed, and then it suddenly works. And behind the scenes, you know what it's doing? It's actually loading tons of rows. It loaded 635,000 rows in what, a couple seconds? It's amazing, right? And now if we do a count here, we can see it's done. One last thing, and then we'll call it a day. I just wanted to show you that did this finish and we went down. It's still in progress, but we'll take a peek at it and then I'll wrap up because I know I'm out of time. So if we go to my workspace, we go to VentureWorks, we can see done tables. Hit refresh, we should get a bunch of tables now. And we do. So it's loading our framework, okay? Let's finish the slide deck and we'll call it day. So Microsoft Fabric is I call it the one-stop shop, right? They took a bunch of tools that they had before, redesigned them, they're much improved. You can do analytical needs, right? As a developer, you can pick your architecture. I use on a lakehouse, use on a warehouse, you can machine learning, Kusto. I did not show you Copilot. A lot of people are pushing Copilot, right? Problem with Copilot is this, is that you need a F64 SKU, okay? It's around 8,000 a month, okay? For small companies, that's probably a lot of, pretty hefty for clients to pay. What does Copilot get you? It kind of gives you like help when doing certain things. If you just learn the technology, you can do it yourself, right? A lot of times, sometimes guess was wrong, right? Like my colleague at work was trying to study for a database exam, asked it a question, and came up with the wrong answer, right? So I did log several bugs. Hopefully, they're going to be making changes. Basically, if you know SQL, Python, and Spark, your future is bright. And again, there's a ton of references. That's it. So I want to thank everyone for their time. And is there any questions?